Hey, Ridley Scott, have you ever heard that phrase about people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones? Hey everyone, this is Kevin T. Rodriguez, film critic of iCritic.net. Welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time with me today. And today, let's talk about Ridley Scott, a world-class famous director who I actually have very, very mixed feelings about. I acknowledge that he is one of the greatest living directors of our time, but I've never exactly been a huge fan of his. I don't want to start citing examples now. I will later about movies of his that are considered classic that I personally don't like, but he has also made some movies that I really do like, one of which I will cite right now being The Last Duel, which it is still a crime that is not been seen very much and more people should see it. It was very, very good, and that movie did not deserve to bomb. But Ridley Scott has made movies that I feel have deserved to bomb, but they didn't. They were wildly embraced. Now, here's the thing, before I get too much off topic. Ridley Scott is making a Apple TV Plus movie called Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix. And he's out there right now doing promotions for Napoleon. He's, for example, already bragging about how there was like a 4+ hour cut of the movie that will be on Apple TV Plus, not in theaters. Apparently the theatrical cut will be a little under 3 hours or something like that. He has some common sense to know that ticket buyers might not go out in droves to see a 4+ hour movie on Napoleon without a intermission of some sort. So he's got that going for him. And he's on the carpets doing his interviews, his press junket, trying to keep the movie in the conversation, not only because it's coming out, but because, Oscar season coming out, Napoleon could potentially be one of the Oscar players, if you will. And when he was asked about casting Joaquin Phoenix, he made a comment that he was inspired to do so after watching Joker, which I don't 100% believe, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But he mentioned that he watched Joker, and this demonic possessed man's like, this was his perfect Napoleon. He also commented that he wasn't a fan of Joker the movie, though, because he didn't like how it glorified violence and basically made, violence fun and things like that. And that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Now, if you watch my channel, you know that I am not one of these people who feel like comic book movies need to be defended. When Martin Scorsese comes out and says something against the comic book genre, even though I personally enjoy watching many of those movies, I'm not going to get all defensive because you know what? His point of view is valid, especially when he wrote that long essay explaining what he meant when he called comic book movies theme park rides. You know what? You read that essay and there is no way to walk away other than to say that this man knows what he's talking about. Maybe you don't personally agree. Maybe you don't take the movies as that way, but this guy is smart enough to know exactly what he is saying. That's why I say that the hate towards Scorsese over comments like these gets so overblown. When you really look at what he's saying, this is a very, very smart man. Ridley Scott is also probably a smart man, but he does not have the convictions that Scorsese does. I remember when All the Money in the World was coming out and he was cutting Kevin Spacey out of the movie to replace him with Christopher Plummer, which there's other issues on why I didn't like that, but it's for another video if you want. And one of the things he said was, what bothered me about that whole situation is Kevin never called me, he never apologized, he never reached out. And then he said it wouldn't have done any good, he was still going to get cut from the movie, but it would have been nice to have been called. And it's like, well, if he was going to get cut out of the movie anyway, what matters if he called or not? It seemed like you'd made up your mind. Maybe even the decision had been made for you. I don't know, but what convictions do you have to say, oh, I deserve to be given a phone call? Even though it meant absolutely nothing in the long run. I wouldn't have paid attention to it. It's not like it would have affected any release plans of the movie. He was getting cut. There's no conviction in a statement like that. And now, here he is promoting his movie, but he's taking a swipe at Joker. And I do feel the need to say something in this particular case for a couple reasons. One, Joker is one of the best comic book based movies I've seen. It was on my top 10 list. I think that movie was being viewed at completely wrong. I think people totally misunderstood the meaning of that movie, but it was a great movie. And so I don't want to turn into the Parasite shouldn't have won guy. If you haven't seen it, look it up. The guy who is complaining that Parasite won Best Picture as opposed to Joker. It's really embarrassing, and those are the kind of fans that you kind of want to distance yourself from a little bit. So it's not going to be like, I'm not going to be like that, but Joker is a good enough movie that it's worth defending. But the real reason is because his comments about Joker glorifying violence are not only not true, it's real rich coming from Ridley Scott. First of all, in regards to Joker, Joker is not a comfortable movie to watch. One of the reasons it can't be glorifying violence is because this movie is not fun. It's not happy. The moments that you smile, you can normally count on one hand for most people. There's the subway dance where he's in the full makeup and he feels free for the first time and he's dancing to I can't play the song, so you have to know what I'm talking about. And it's like that's kind of a cute scene because he's kind of freeing himself for the first time. And a scene where he is kissing a woman that he likes is also one of the rare moments of happiness in this movie, and that ended up ending in tragedy if you've seen the movie. But otherwise, this movie is not fun to watch. This is very much a movie about the forgotten people who become the quote-unquote incels that we demonize. We demonize them for being violent, for causing problems, for having these extreme points of view. And yet, Joker is a movie that highlights, hey, these are normal people, but look at their environment. Look at the way they're treated. This is a guy who, in the very first scene, his sign that he works for is stolen by a bunch of teenagers, and then he is beat up immediately after with that sign. And because they stole the sign and beat him up, he got fired from that job from a temp agency, and he can't get work. He gets fired from job to job. The government office where he's doing therapy gets shut down because of a lack of funds. Like the politician who, in Thomas Wayne in this case, who is going to all these events with rich people saying how he's going to fight for the poor people and he's going to take care of them, he's going to clean up the streets. He does not want to spend 5 minutes with Arthur Fleck, the very people he is campaigning on to help. This is a movie about how we as a society create these monsters. And we look down upon them, we create them, and then we almost don't want to take any acknowledgement of the fact that we have contributed to the way that they are. I think that's the real reason Joker got like a lot of people in the media so uptight, was because they saw a little bit of what they were doing in this movie, got a little too close to home, and so they just decided, no, this movie is a movie for incels. All right, whatever. That's one of the reasons why this movie is not glorifying violence, because, you know, when you finish watching this movie, you need a hug. One of the stories I like to share, because me and my wife saw it in IMAX, and it was, I think, the first laser IMAX movie that we saw, and like, oh my gosh, the picture was improved so much. After it said the end, I looked at my wife and like, well, that was cheerful, wasn't it? And she's just looking at me. And I'm like, do you need a hug, honey? And she's just like, it was like, no one was feeling good after watching that movie. And then When my dad watched it with me about several months later, he was like, I totally understand why Joaquin Phoenix won that Oscar, and it was a great movie. I don't want to watch it ever again. And he saves that comment for movies like Saving Private Ryan and Passion of the Christ, really heavy movies. So this is not a movie that can glorify violence when you're getting that kind of reaction from people. Now, here's the other thing. I don't believe Ridley Scott said he watched this movie and then decided, like, oh, I realize how great Joaquin Phoenix is, and so I was going to cast him in this. Ridley Scott has worked with Joaquin Phoenix before. He worked with him on Gladiator. He worked with him on a couple other movies. Like, Ridley Scott knows how good of an actor Joaquin Phoenix is. He knows what kind of energy Phoenix can bring to a role. So I believe that Ridley Scott hired Joaquin Phoenix because he worked with him before, and he knew that through experience, this actor would be good for Napoleon. I think he was just taking a pot shot at Joker for whatever reason. And now for the reason why I wanted to make this video and why I kind of want to fire back at Ridley Scott a little bit. Ridley Scott really should not be making a comment like this because unlike Joker, which does not glorify violence despite what some of the critics say, Ridley Scott has made movies that glorify violence. Or at the very least, the violence is fun. Let's talk about his Best Picture winner, Gladiator. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of tragedy in there, wife and son died, and there's like a revenge story. But those action sequences, and I personally don't like Gladiator, but that being said, those action sequences inside the Coliseum are breathtaking. A lot of people really get excited as they watch him killing the tiger and killing the people and standing around like, are you not entertained? This isn't glorifying violence. All right, what about like Alien? Yeah, it's a monster movie. Alien is roaming the ship and Sigourney Weaver has to take it down. Whatever. But even though it's a horror movie, you mean to tell me that you are not getting excited as she beats that alien up? Like, this is exciting. It's violence. And before you say like, well, aliens don't exist, this can't actually happen, the fact that you are making a movie where it is exciting to kill a creature, that's not glorifying violence? What about Blade Runner? Granted, it's a little slower, and the Denis Villeneuve sequel is so much better. I think Blade Runner's definitely not, anyway, it's not that great. A lot of violence in Blade Runner. There's some exciting chase sequences in that movie. Is that not glorifying violence? What about Hannibal? Like, oh my gosh, Hannibal. Like, that's not even saying anything important. This movie should have been NC-17 because of the violence and the gore. Scott seemed to almost be getting off on making the movie as gory as possible. But this is not glorifying violence. And then we get to probably the best example of them all, Thelma and Louise, a movie that I actually finally watched for the first time about a month and a half ago, and oh my gosh, I love this movie. Where has this movie been on my life? I should have watched it so much sooner than I did. And so I want to preface this by saying, yeah, Thelma and Louise, classic movie. Absolute classic. Like, my esteem for Ridley Scott went way up after seeing this movie. But guys, it is about two outlaw women. And yes, what sets the whole thing off is that they shoot and kill a guy who was going to do something very unspeakable to Louise. I understand that. Like, what they did was not entirely unjustified. But look at the tone of the movie. They are robbing banks. They are driving away from people. They are holding people up at gunpoint. Like, the whole ending where they drive the car in a certain direction and you know exactly what's going to happen to them, and it is seen as empowering and grand and fun. This doesn't glorify violence. I'm not even going to talk about American Gangster, another of his movies that I love, where it's like, yeah, I guess technically Denzel Washington gets caught at the end, but he's living his best life being a drug dealer. His life seems to be a lot more boring after he serves his time and squares away his life. That's not glorifying the gangster lifestyle. Look, I am not going to sit here and be a prude and say that your movies have to demonize violence. You know, violence is a part of life, and in a fictional setting, it can be thought-provoking, fun, therapeutic. There's many ways violence can be used. What I took issue with here is, even though I am not going to become one of those people who are going to defend a comic book movie every time someone says something bad about it, because I'm not. I totally agree with everything Martin Scorsese says about comic book movies. I agree with everything Steven Spielberg says about franchise films. Like, these are not opinions I disagree with. But I do take issue when a acclaimed filmmaker brushes off what is, in my opinion, a great movie, and he's like, oh, I just don't like how that movie glorifies violence, when this guy has made a career of glorifying violence, not to mention his brother Tony Scott also made movies like Top Gun, so, you know, it seems to run the family where violence is not a huge concern for them. But that being said, what do you think? Am I overthinking this? Am I right or am I wrong? I would love to know your thoughts. Comment below, like, favorite, share, subscribe, and as always, flame responsibly. Have a good one.